Imagine you're sitting in a room full of people, laughing, talking, celebrating, and yet something inside you feels completely hollow, like you're watching your own life through glass. Now imagine a group of researchers documented exactly what that feeling does to your brain, your arteries, your immune system, and then buried the findings for nearly a decade. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is something that happened. And what those scientists discovered about loneliness might be the most important thing no one ever told you. For most of the 20th century, loneliness was considered a personal problem, a character flaw even. You were lonely because you were awkward or difficult or just not trying hard enough. There were no studies, no funding, no urgency. Because the assumption was simple: if you're lonely, fix yourself. But in the late 1990s, a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago named John Cacioppo began asking a different question entirely. What if loneliness wasn't a social failure? What if it was a biological signal, as old as hunger, as urgent as pain, designed to protect us from the most dangerous thing our ancestors could face: being alone? His research was groundbreaking, his conclusions were stunning, and the institutions that funded him had no idea what to do with what he found. Cacioppo's team ran a series of studies across multiple decades, tracking hundreds of individuals, their social lives, their health markers, their brain activity. The data was unambiguous. Lonely people showed elevated cortisol, the stress hormone, even when nothing stressful was happening. Their immune systems were operating in a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation, the kind linked to heart disease, Alzheimer's, and accelerated aging. Their DNA was literally changing. Specifically, genes related to inflammation were being upregulated in isolated individuals, while genes related to antiviral response were shutting down. Loneliness was rewriting the operating code of the human cell. Think about what that means for a second. Not that loneliness makes you sad, not that it makes life harder, but that it reaches down into the nucleus of your cells and starts changing what gets expressed and what gets silenced. Your body, at the molecular level, responds to isolation the same way it responds to a physical wound. It goes into emergency mode. And if that emergency never ends, the emergency mode becomes your baseline. That is not a metaphor, that is biology. But here's the part that didn't make it into press releases. Loneliness was found to be more deadly than obesity. More deadly than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Read that again. So why didn't this become front-page news? There are a few answers, and none of them are flattering. First, there was the problem of stigma. Public health campaigns require public cooperation, and in the early 2000s, telling people that loneliness is killing you created shame, not action. Focus groups found that lonely people, when confronted with the data, became more withdrawn, not less. The researchers were advised by institutional communications teams to soften the language, to talk about social connection and community health, not about the specific, measurable lethality of isolation. Second, there was money. The pharmaceutical industry had no product for loneliness. There was no pill. There was no billable diagnosis code with a matching treatment protocol. Health systems are built around solvable problems, problems that generate revenue. Loneliness generated neither. Third, and this is the most uncomfortable part, governments and corporations had a financial interest in isolated consumers. Lonely people watch more television. They spend more online. They work more hours because they have nothing else to fill the silence. The economics of modern loneliness were, quietly, extremely profitable. And here's something even fewer people talk about. The rise of the smartphone happened to coincide almost perfectly with the steepest recorded decline in close friendships in American history. Between 2003 and 2023, the percentage of Americans with no close friends tripled. Tripled. That's not a coincidence. That's a business model. But let's go deeper into what the science actually shows, because it's stranger than you might expect. Cacioppo discovered that loneliness doesn't just hurt you physically, it changes how you think. Isolated individuals show a measurable bias toward threat detection. Their brains, starved of social connection, enter a kind of hypervigilance, scanning every interaction for danger, interpreting ambiguous expressions as hostile, treating strangers as threats by default. In other words, loneliness makes the world look more dangerous than it is. And a world that looks dangerous is one you retreat from further, which makes you lonelier, which makes the world look more dangerous. It's a trap, and most people don't know they're in it. What's worse, this hypervigilance feels like wisdom. It feels like clarity, like you've finally seen people for who they really are. But it's not insight, it's damage. Your threat detection system, running without rest, starts generating false positives, starts reading indifference as hostility, neutrality as rejection, silence as abandonment. Loneliness doesn't just make you feel alone. It makes you feel like being alone was the right call all along. That's how it sustains itself. His team also found something that no one wanted to talk about in policy circles: Loneliness is contagious. When one person in a social network becomes isolated, their withdrawal affects the social behaviors of people around them, who then affect their networks, spreading outward like a slow-moving infection through 3 degrees of separation. This meant loneliness wasn't just a personal health crisis, it was a structural one, and addressing it would require rethinking the physical design of cities, the architecture of the workplace, the policy of urban zoning, not just encouraging people to call their grandmothers more often. That was too expensive, too disruptive, too inconvenient. So the finding was quietly shelved. Here's what makes this different from a conspiracy theory. The research was published. You can read it. Cacioppo's 2008 book, Loneliness, Human Nature, and the Need for Social Connection, lays it all out in clear language. But publication is not the same as action. The U.S. Surgeon General didn't formally declare loneliness a public health crisis until 2023, 15 years after the data was in hand. The UK appointed a minister for loneliness in 2018, only after the assassination of MP Joe Cox, whose legacy work centered on social isolation. Australia followed. Japan followed. 15 years of people dying from something that was already measured, documented, and understood. And even now, even with the formal declarations, the solutions offered are mostly superficial. Apps that simulate connection, hotlines that transfer you to strangers, corporate wellness programs that schedule social time like a calendar appointment. None of them address the architecture of the problem. There's one more thing Cacioppo found that almost never gets mentioned. He studied people who, by every external measure, had rich social lives. Friends, family, colleagues, parties on the weekends. And some of them were still profoundly lonely. Because what matters isn't the number of people around you. What matters is whether any of them actually know you. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who only see a version of you. The version that's performing. The version that's functional, presentable, fine. And when you spend years in that mode, something starts to feel not just empty, but fraudulent. Like the connection itself is a lie, because the person they're connecting with isn't really you. Cacioppo called this the quality gap. It's not about social quantity, it's about whether you've been witnessed, truly, without the performance. And in a culture that rewards performance above almost everything else, that gap is growing. Here's the part nobody tells you because it doesn't fit neatly into a motivational ending. You cannot think your way out of loneliness. You cannot self-improve your way out of it. You cannot meditate or journal or optimize your routine enough to compensate for the biological requirement of being known by another person. What Cacioppo's research ultimately showed is that humans are not merely social creatures by preference. We are social creatures by design, built at the cellular level to require witnessing, to require being seen. The solution isn't more screen time with friendly faces. It's proximity, consistency, vulnerability. It's the terrifying, inconvenient, unremarkable work of showing up for other people regularly enough that they start showing up for you. The scientists knew this. They published it. The systems around us decided the information was too expensive to act on. Now you know. What you do with it is up to you. If this video made you think of someone you haven't talked to in a while, maybe that's not a coincidence. Drop a comment below. What's one relationship in your life you want to invest in this week? And if you want to understand more about the hidden forces shaping your health, your decisions, and your life, subscribe. We go deep here, and we don't look away from the uncomfortable stuff. See you in the next one.